Hello, and welcome to Women in Retail Talks, the podcast where C-suite executive women in the retail space share their stories of professional growth, leadership development, personal journeys, and more. I'm Marie Albajes, managing editor of Women in Retail, a membership-based community of executive women at leading retailers and brands. Today, I'm joined by Louisa Schneider, the founder and CEO of Rowan, the ear piercing and jewelry brand. Louisa and I talk about her non-traditional start to retail, her motivation for starting Rowan, and so much more. So, Louisa, I'm going to bring you in. Welcome to the Women in Retail Talks podcast.
Thank you, Marie, for having me today.
I'm so excited to just learn a little bit more about your background and how you got started. So, maybe let's start with your decision to launch Rowan. Did you always have kind of that entrepreneurial spirit? Where did that come from?
Yes, I did. As early as I can remember, I was thinking of ways to make life easier for myself, to, have toys more easily. I wished that I had come up with the idea for the Walkman, millions of things like that. And so Rowan really stemmed out of this constant iteration that I had of how can I make something easier, more accessible, more fun, more interesting. And when my daughter was born, she is 10 years old now, I thought about getting her ears pierced. And interestingly, at the time, I was working in finance. My prior career was entirely in finance. And I was studying at that time a pending bankruptcy of Claire's. And it was just this moment where I thought, wow, this experience that is going to be so important for me as a mom, and eventually for my daughter, there's really nowhere to take her that I'm going to be super excited about. And suddenly could not stop thinking about the idea of creating a safer, more celebratory, more intentional piercing experience.
I like that you said you couldn't stop thinking about it. And I guess my question there is, what do you do from there? At what point do you realize I'm not going to be able to sleep until I get this idea off the ground?
That's right. So prior to COVID, when we went into an office 5 days a week and commuted from the suburbs, I had a fair amount of time on Metro North on a train. And a lot of what I would do is read or iterate on ideas. And when the idea for Rowan started to form in my head, I I would spend time on the train writing. And I had a notebook and I would write ideas and iterate on that and think through business models, concepts, what could be better than today. And a lot of reading would inform those ideas, and then also life experiences. So both of my parents are doctors. My sister is an OBGYN. All of my aunts are nurses. And so my childhood was spent at the dinner table talking about medical things and prioritizing that as something that was considered really important. And so we were lucky enough that if we had an issue, typically one of my parents' friends that were doctors would see us. And I know that when I had my ears pierced, there was not a doctor who would do the procedure, and I did go to the mall, but one of my aunts went with my mom, and they both had a lot to say about the aftercare, et cetera. So it was an experience where I did have that kind of medical vote of approval and aftercare that most of my friends didn't have. And so, it really, in terms of getting the idea off the ground, I would come home talking about it. I would talk about it over dinner. I would talk about it with friends. I would talk about it with family. And so I was actually at a baby shower for my cousin, who is also a nurse. And she lives in Birmingham, Michigan, where we now have a studio, a Rowan studio. And it was her baby shower for her first child. And we were all there and we went on a walk. And there were about 6 of us. Again, all my aunts are nurses and my cousin. And they all said, well, yeah, we get asked about ear piercing in different clinical settings. And some of them had pierced ears when they had worked for pediatricians' offices previously. So, and they said they enjoyed doing it and it was fun. And so it really, for me, I was able to to mentally walk through a lot of the concept before ever actually getting started.
Yeah. So help me understand what it looked like to combine the worlds of medical and retail like that.
That is a great question, and it is partly there's a lot happening in this space now, this sort of cross section of medical and retail, and you see it in aesthetic dermatology. You see it in a post-COVID world where customers prioritize sterility and safety and cleanliness in a way perhaps that they didn't previously, and they might not even be aware of that. There is an aspect of personalization and making the most of moments. I think also that in some ways may be a byproduct of COVID, or maybe it's something we didn't realize that was important before, but really is, which is it's the everyday things, sometimes things that experiences that you could get somewhere and it would be okay, but you would miss out on the opportunity to really intentionally and mindfully celebrate it. And, life is short. So we wanna be able to do that. And at Rowan, what we just remark on is how incredible it is that really no one gets pierced alone. Some people do, but if they do, they're certainly celebrating with the whole team at Rowan when they do. But most people bring a family member or a best friend or multiple family members. And so it's truly a celebration with every single appointment.
Yeah, that's a great observation. We had you on the podcast in 2020, speaking of COVID, and, we're 5 years later. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the growth, at the company since then. How are you maintaining that growth while also kind of staying true to the essence of what you just described?
So I think what's so hard about the early days for me of starting a business, and I cannot imagine I'm alone. And I know that in talking with friends who have started companies or who are doing it, the early days are some of the most difficult because for a lot of reasons. One, you get a tremendous amount of inbound thoughts and views on your idea. And you want to listen to them to a point, but it can be disheartening or it can cause some drift in your concept. And that's hard because you really are the visionary of your own idea and you should try and stay as true to it as you can. With that said, if someone brings something to your attention that fundamentally changes your view, that's really important to listen to as well. When you are early on, you are doing everything, and that includes fundraising, that includes many things that aren't specifically a function of the business that you're bringing. And so that part is really difficult because you don't have the infrastructure to support yourself. And so it's really important to have a good network at home, to have a partner if you're married or not who who understands that it's 24/7. You really are completely immersing yourself in it, and it will become a fabric of almost every conversation that you're having, which can be exhausting. So trying to find an outlet for me, it's yoga. I dedicate myself to the practice of yoga at least once a day because I am able to stop thinking when I'm doing it. And that hour is so helpful to me. And I know there are lots of things that other people do, but a way to just have some time for yourself that's not going to be entrenched in the thinking of the business.
Hmm.
But, those early days raising money and then pivoting during COVID were so, so difficult, and the reason that we continued to work is that the concept was so clear to me. It was that ear piercing done the way that it was being done was not good enough, and we were bringing a new concept to the market, which prioritized what I believed the decision maker in the ear piercing experience would also prioritize most of the time, which was safety. People wanna go somewhere that's safe. They want to know that if they're getting pierced with a needle, that it's sterile. They want to know that the person who's piercing them understands bloodborne pathogens. We just had a call with our customer experience team, and they were talking and we were also talking with our medical board this morning, and one of our nurses was talking about an incident with a customer who did not know that she had a vasovagal reaction to needles, that her daughter did. And the nurses were able to identify her beginning to have that before she actually did ultimately faint, but they knew what to do. They knew how to take care of her. She was perfectly safe. She had a great piercing experience. Everything worked out well. But the benefit of the medical professional in that moment was an absolutely critical differentiator between a success and a pretty bad experience. So I think where we are today versus 2020 is night and day.
Hmm.
What is the same is that thread of knowing that we were looking for excellence and quality and a safe and celebratory piercing experience. That has remained true throughout. And one area of my past that I've been able to bring forward is my finance background, and specifically a value investing background where the focus has been to build a company that can generate a profit and that can generate a profit at the unit level so that when you do many, many, many units, you're profitable. And it seems like such a simple concept, but certainly when interest rates were at zero or close to zero, many, many companies and startups were not profitable, but they were able to sell themselves for a very large amount because they were able to generate revenue. They were not necessarily able to generate profit, but a buyer believed that they would be able to remove costs from the infrastructure or that individual service to create a profit at the end. And from my standpoint, that was always very scary because it's almost a game of musical chairs. And I did not want to build a business that was based on a hope and a dream. I wanted to build a business that had longevity and could sustain itself and its own growth.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you said, night and day. And look where you started off with. I think you started off as like a home service setup, and then you kind of moved into pop ups at places like Target, and now you're scaling, your own standalone studios. But you've got that kind of guiding principle that you've always stuck to that has brought you to where you are today with these standalone studios. So I would love to hear just a little bit about what you learned from each of those major pivots.
There have been a lot of pivots, and it is one thing that investors and board members have said to me, wow, Louisa, you have navigated these pivots incredibly well. And in retrospect, we can now tell you that we might have doubted you a little bit, or we might have doubted your decision a little bit at the time. And perhaps that's even putting it
Mhm.
mildly. And I appreciate that at the time they stood shoulder to shoulder by my side. That was very important. And I do believe that they did share concerns, even though they shared that they believed I could do it. But leaving Target was probably the most challenging because our lead investor had invested in us and really sold that investment to their investors as the central thesis around investing in Rowan was our ability to scale within Target. And we did scale within Target. We scaled rapidly. We were in 300, almost 300 Target locations across the country.
Yeah.
We may have had as many as 40 Target locations in the Dallas area alone in Texas. But what we discovered is that we were driving a lot of traffic into Target and creating a lot of value for Target, but we were not building the Rowan brand. And our nurses, who are so important to Rowan, were not getting treated in the way that we felt good about. And that wasn't because of any one specific issue other than they weren't in our four walls and we could not control the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very clear to me that continuing down that path was not going to yield a result that was going to make me happy. And it wasn't going to be in the benefit of Rowan long term. And so this was my opportunity to build a company where I had had a vision and I had seen something that was really needed in the market. And I had spent my entire career up until that point helping to build other people's visions. And it made the decision to exit Target easier because I felt so strongly that I deserved to see my idea through in the way that made sense to me. And that was that the Rowan nurse essentially be put on a pedestal and that the Rowan ear piercing experience be unlike any other ear piercing experience,
Yeah.
that it be safe and celebratory. And those things weren't possible there. So the pivot in my mind was easy. But then what had to happen is, again, we had to essentially furlough a lot of people. A lot of them were nurses, and promise them that we would bring them back on if they wanted to continue to work with us as soon as we were able to open our own stores in their cities. And what's been great is that we have done that. Some nurses have worked for us again in cities like Austin, Texas, or Chicago, or Dallas, and many other cities. Some have even moved, but a lot of that was in communicating. And I think that's one thing about pivoting that's really critical is communicate the why to all of your constituents, to your investors, to your employees, and to your customers. And if the why is genuine and it makes sense, they will be able to understand it and get behind it.
I'm hearing this thread of, as long as you have your why for what you're doing, that is going to guide you and you're going to find a solution. Sounds like
Right.
throughout your career and throughout building this brand, you've had this kind of very clear idea. And if whatever's going on doesn't match your idea, then you kind of have the ability to identify those gaps and those problems and always bring it back to that guiding principle, that why.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. And I think it probably means I miss certain things, but for me, it makes sense.
Mhm.
For better or worse, that's how I think.
No, I mean, it's great. And in the last couple minutes that we have, I'd love to know, for our audience listening who maybe is considering a pivot either in the business or in their personal life, and they've got this idea like Rowan that they want to just, jump into. Any final advice for that listener who is, deep in that decision making?
What I've said consistently is if it is an idea that keeps you up at night and you feel really passionately about it, it's worth pursuing. And you will always feel better having tried it than not. So certainly go do it. And if you're able to do it without taking on additional funding, great. If you do take on additional funding, great as well, but understand that that comes with huge responsibility. And if you don't have a background in business or in finance, make sure that who you're working with does, and that you're able to get good advice, and that you really understand the decisions that you're making from that standpoint, both in who you're inviting to your ownership table, who will be helping make decisions alongside you. I think a lot of entrepreneurs end up giving up a tremendous amount of their business very early on, and they don't understand that. And they also lose the ability to make their own decisions, which in many ways is why people start companies in the first place. There's two reasons. One is I kind of want to control my own destiny. I want to be my own boss. I am done with working for other people. I get that. I totally get that. And certainly that was a part of my own motivation. But the other is, I have an idea that I just cannot stop thinking about. Sometimes those things go hand in hand, and I think that typically yields a winner. If you're just, in the first camp, but you don't have an idea, you could certainly still be successful, and vice versa. If you are happy to work with or for others, also great. But, I do think that it is really, really important to know what the ramifications of certain decisions are and go in eyes wide open from that standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening could benefit from learning a lot from you. So I'm so happy that you were able to come back on. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and I can't wait to see what's next for Rowan. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate you having me on again. Great to see you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please go to womeninretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review our show. Lastly, if you're a female retail leader interested in joining our community at Women in Retail Leadership Circle, visit womeninretail.com/apply. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.